The divide. A pattern is a discernible regularity. Recognition is the detection, comparison, and storage of features. In pattern recognition, we aim to identify the features of a pattern and store them in a medium, whether neurons, genes, a scientific model, written symbols, or language. But there exists a fundamental separation between the pattern and its recognition. Although we describe patterns as being composed of features, this is not entirely accurate. When a patternist refers to patterns as having features, we are speaking about the recognition of the pattern, not the pattern itself. There is a gap. The pattern is unattainable. It can be confusing and paradoxical, yet there is an undeniable gap between reality and its representations. It is when we mistakenly believe that we have seized reality in our hands and forget that we are merely holding on to a representation that things go wrong. For a patternist, there is an immense divide between a pattern and its recognition. We can only store representations of a pattern, not the pattern itself. All we have access to is the recognition, not the pattern itself. We must always be aware of this divide, for within it lies the potential for deception, illusions, hallucination, and bias. Even camouflage and the way drugs trick receptors exploit this gap between a pattern and its recognition. It is a trap. The result of the trap is the category of phenomena that is the misidentification of patterns. For a patternist, phenomena such as deception, illusions, hallucination, bias, camouflage, the effects of illicit drugs, and even the manipulation of language and propaganda are genuine biological phenomena, and thus must be included in a complete theory of intelligence. All the tools we use to find patterns, repetition, prediction, natural selection, and categorization, have inherent weaknesses that can lead to the misidentification of patterns. Improper use of repetition can lead a learning agent to develop biases. Through repetition, we identify patterns by examining a collection of entities and noting what repeats across the entire set. Ideally, this collection should be comprehensive, covering all related phenomena. For example, to identify all tree species in a forest, we must examine every tree. To understand human regularities, we would need to observe every person on Earth. However, analyzing every entity is often infeasible due to the sheer amount of data. In practice, we study a subset and assume what holds for the subset applies to the entire collection. If the subset is not large, random, or representative enough, our pattern will be biased. We end up making assumptions about the entire collection when, in reality, our findings may only apply to the subset. Categorization can produce similar biases when based on limited or unrepresentative samples. The weakness of prediction lies in the unpredictability of the universe. The world is messy, with countless variables, both known and unknown, that affect events and outcomes. In a controlled lab setting, variables can be limited, but in the real world, accurate predictions become far more difficult, especially for complex phenomena. Additionally, there is the question of whether an inaccurate prediction is better than none. Does the potential reward of betting on low probability odds outweigh the cost? There is a spectrum of predictability. Some phenomena, such as those in physics and chemistry, are highly predictable. Others, like weather, vary in accuracy. Biological phenomena, with their intricate interactions, offer limited predictability. Finally, there are humans, whose consciousness allows for deliberate unpredictability, especially when we realize we are following a pattern. Prediction also relies on accurate feature comparison, which depends on properly functioning sensors, such as eyes and ears. As these sensors are representations themselves, they are subject to the divide, limiting their reliability and making them susceptible to manipulation, as seen in magic tricks exploiting sensory assumptions. Natural selection also faces challenges with the divide. First, we do not fully understand the patterns exploited in natural selection. The divide exists between hereditary material, genes, and their functional expression. Bridging genetic sequences with proteins and their specific roles within organisms involves many complex steps. Second, variation is essential. For natural selection to occur, genetic mutations introduce heritable differences. However, this creates a paradox. Genes must simultaneously serve as the recognition of a stable pattern and also as variations to test whether the pattern has changed. Moreover, we cannot distinguish between stability and variation until the outcome is clear, until it becomes evident whether the organism survives and reproduces. Entities can be miscategorized. Ambiguity arises when an entity shares features with two different categories. For instance, Should tomatoes be classified as fruits or vegetables? Should the Tasmanian wolf be grouped with the American wolf, which shares its carnivore body design, or with the kangaroo, to which it is more genetically similar? This represents a conflict of patterns, and the decision on which pattern to use depends on the agent performing the categorization process. Miscategorization can also be deliberate. The divide between a pattern and its recognition is itself a regularity and can be exploited by any intelligent agent. The misuse of categorization leads to propaganda and language manipulation. Every word in a dictionary can be viewed as a category with defining features. Manipulating language involves finding words that meet primary features, while carrying additional connotations, positive or negative, depending on the desired message. For example, political events might be categorized as either riots or protests. Events aligned with the main narrative may be labeled protests, while those opposing it are labeled riots. Whether participants are celebrated or penalized depends on this categorization. The agent setting the narrative determines the label. One state might call an event a riot, while another might label it a protest. The misuse of language is abundant among human beings because we recognize the divide and fully exploit it. We distort the meaning of words until they no longer match their original meanings, until the recognition no longer matches the pattern. A break is inevitable. Word either evolves, taking on new meanings, or those who manipulate the language collapse, allowing the language to be restored. A pattern may not always remain a pattern. It must be constantly checked to ensure it remains a reliable regularity. Similarly, representations must be verified to ensure they align with what they aim to represent. Words must match their meaning, and the recognition of a pattern must always be checked to confirm that the defining features triggering recognition remain true. A lapse in vigilance can lead to failure, blindness, or even extinction. A patternist must remain aware that what we believe to be true might not be. What we hear and see may be a lie. A scientific model can be wrong. We must constantly check and recheck, for patterns can change, they can evolve, and they can suddenly cease to be.